The real-time strategy campaign is pretty much dead, or at least nowhere near as popular as it used to be. The people who like deep and involved decision making with the added pressure of real-time commands have moved on to Total War and Paradox games, and the people looking for micro-intensive skirmishes have moved on to action RPGs or one of many Dota style games, which of course started out as a mod for Warcraft 3. There are a bunch of very good reasons why RTS campaigns have kind of died out, but instead of that, I want to talk about Starcraft II, in many ways the last hurrah of the single player RTS, and if you ask me, the rightful queen of the genre. Before they began to mass produce Skinner boxes, Blizzard used to make RTS in the form of Starcraft and Warcraft. The early games were okay, but it wasn't until Warcraft 3, and to a greater extent Starcraft II, that Blizzard hit on a fantastic formula for developing missions. That formula is all about injecting variety and strategic shakeups into the three main layers of the game: the micro layer, the macro layer, and the meta layer. That's something that the classic style of RTS made by Blizzard and Westwood back in the day really shined at: ambitious design. So many strategy games nowadays are focus tested into a very specific vision that caters to a specific kind of player, but Starcraft and its like had a little bit of something for everyone, and it's the epitomising of this philosophy that puts Starcraft II and Blizzard above their contemporaries. First, and arguably most important of all, is how Blizzard shake up the individual battles that make up missions, or as it's called in competitive circles, the micro part of the game. In the Starcraft campaigns, your unit roster is fed to you gradually over the course of 20 or so missions, with most of them unlocking a single new unit or building, and those that don't allowing you to upgrade one you already have. A great example of this is Shoot the Messenger in the Zerg campaign. In this mission you gain access to the Hydralisk, which is great at shooting down enemy aircraft at long range like these transports you need to destroy, as well as dealing with infantry when backed up by bulkier, shorter ranged roaches, which you get in the mission before. You might be thinking, oh, so you just build a bunch of Hydralisks and face roll the mission, right? Wrong. The genius of Blizzard's mission design is that it teaches you not just the strengths of the unit in the spotlight, but also their weaknesses. Sure, Hydralisks are great at killing aircraft and squishy ground forces, but they're slow and are very fragile. When you've got to take out more than one transport ship at once, you're forced to slither all the way across the map to get to the ship in time. If you're clever and try and leave pockets of Hydras in the flight paths of the ships, you leave them open to ambush by high damage, bulkier units like Stalkers. This forces you to understand the eternal bond between Roaches and Hydralisks. The former soaks up the damage, while the latter dishes out the pain. This foundational strategy will serve you well throughout the campaign as you continue to alter and refine it by adding new units to the mix and experimenting with upgrades. These nuanced relationships between units wouldn't be possible if they didn't have a very well communicated identity. Each unit in a Blizzard RTS has a thing. A key factor about the unit that sets them up as unique compared to other similar units that do the same job in other factions. This philosophy can be seen very clearly in each faction's siege unit. The Terrans have the mighty siege tank, which can set up into a huge artillery cannon, the Protoss have the Colossus, which shoots horizontal laser beams from afar, and the Zerg have the Broodlord, who spits out little babies to kill stuff. Now, these units all kind of do the same thing, deal a lot of damage at long range, but they all go about it in different yet easy to understand ways. Once you've heard the telltale explosions of siege tank shells and seen your pack of Zerglings you spent so long nurturing evaporate, the siege tank and what it does is going to be burned into your brain. This allows you to formulate a strategy to overcome them based on the easy to remember qualities of your own units. Which brings me nicely onto the macro side of missions. Macro gameplay in StarCraft is all about the bigger picture. Not just how you'll win an individual fight, but your overall plan to beat the mission. If you're going to be doing the same thing every time, a dominant strategy is going to form. This can be seen in the early stages of the Terran campaign, by massing Marines who are cheap ranged units, medics who can heal, and Marauders who have anti-armor missiles and an optional slow. You can make a big death ball that obliterates a lot of the early missions, which mostly involve fighting packs of enemies in the open. It isn't until you're expected to start assaulting heavily fortified positions, stacked with a lot of units, that this strategy runs into some trouble. By varying what you've got to do in any given mission, your unit compositions have to change. The most obvious instance of this is in the mission Outbreak. This mission has a day-night cycle which sees you defending your base against hordes of zombies at night and destroying the buildings they've spawned from during the day. The old Triple M won't cut it here. Your big ball of dudes is too slow to kill buildings effectively during the day, and can't split up to defend all three fronts of your base at night. Enter AoE badasses the Firebats, and these zippy flamethrower cars called Hellions, who come in very handy during the night and day respectively. By changing up what you have to do, Blizzard ensures that no one strategy becomes completely dominant. Well, not entirely. Massed carriers and battlecruisers will tear through just about anything. Whilst there are a lot of weird missions like this one where you have to dodge lava, or this one where you control 4 hero units and don't have a base, there are actually still a fair amount of more traditional objectives in Starcraft II's campaign. Stuff like defend for a set time, or destroy the enemy base. The thing that stops these kind of missions becoming boring is the fact that Blizzard usually makes sure to give you something fun to do in the meantime, or to reward you with a cool power trip moment at the end. The mission Cutthroat plays like the obligatory collect a bunch of resources mission in most RTS campaigns. But instead of just ending when you collect the right amount, Starcraft II instead hands you a massive army and lets you steamroll the enemy base for an awesome cathartic finish. Of special note is Engine of Destruction, which sees your army having to babysit this massive cool mech called the Odin. The game constantly rubs how cool this thing is in your face, and you don't get the payoff until Media Blitz, where this time you're in control of the Odin, as well as some baby versions called Thors, and you get to totally lay waste to an entire map. It's fantastic. Typically, RTS campaigns were just a set of glorified skirmishes. Sure, you might have some shake-ups like a special unit or modified starting editions occasionally, but that's about it. My issue with this setup is that things quickly become routine. Once build orders and counters are memorized, the game kind of leaves macro strategy behind and becomes exclusively focused on the micro side of things. Not that there's anything wrong with that, it's led to some of the best RTS campaigns ever, including my personal favourite, Dawn of War 2. These games are great at promoting the shorter term, more micro side of RTS, where every skirmish and unit matters, testing your on-the-fly decision making as you set up firing arcs and flanks to crush your enemies. Of course, there are games which do the opposite, that have fairly simplistic units, but in-depth build orders and economics. These are a more macro kind of RTS, like Creeper World 3 Arc Eternal, a game that sees you using a set of emplacements and aircraft to slowly push back this weird liquid enemy called the Creep. Games like this usually have lengthy matches which are all about how well you can manage your economy and information gathering to win the overall war, rather than a single battle. Blizzard and Starcraft II try and shoot for a balance of both, but there's one more factor that ties both the macro and micro together, and that is the meta layer. What do I mean by this? Well, simply put, meta decisions are ones that take place outside of the actual gameplay space, or at least in a separate layer of the game. Unlike micro and macro gameplay, which are all about reacting to known information, meta gameplay requires you to anticipate the shift and flux of the other two before the game has even started. In Tooth and Tail, you pick your lineup of 6 cuddly critters to use before the game starts, and, crucially, without knowing what your enemies picked. This means you'll have to extrapolate what you know about popular setups and the relative power levels of all the different units to try and predict the actions of your opponent and plan accordingly. Mechanics that involve meta, higher level decisions are something that RTS games typically stray away from unless they're built around them like Tooth and Tail, and who can blame developers? With most RTS taking place over short matches and having a highly competitive multiplayer focus, changing the conditions of the game before it starts is a recipe for balanced disaster. Not to mention the fact that even in games that don't explicitly enable them, metagames will evolve in games anyway. Just look at the infamous Zergling rush in the multiplayer side of Starcraft II. For those not acquainted, it's when the Zerg get out a spawning pool and a few Zerglings as fast as possible to annihilate the other players' workers before they've had a chance to build any defences. It's an opening technique that shaped how many players play the game simply by existing as a threat. You might be wondering, hey, why isn't this guy showing us any footage of Zergling rushes? Well, that's because in the most recent expansion to Starcraft II, Legacy of the Void, Blizzard increased the number of resource harvesting workers each player starts with. This means they have to spend less time worrying about early game economies, which means that they can build units faster, nullifying the effectiveness of rush strategies. This is a really interesting meta decision on Blizzard's part. By increasing the strength of early game economies, they indirectly kill problematic early game all-in strategies like the Zergling rush, showing how deeply intertwined each of the 3 decision-making layers are. Luckily for us, the Starcraft II campaign doesn't need to be quite so tightly balanced, and that's why it's full of decisions you can make that change how each of your individual units, and thusly your overall strategy, work. These choices are present in all 3 parts. In the Terran campaign, you can do research and buy upgrades for your units in the armory. The Zerg get to tinker with Kerrigan's moveset as well as choose upgrades for most of your units, one of 3 smaller upgrades and a big permanent choice between 2 a few missions after you get them. I feel like Legacy of the Void, the Protoss campaign, does this meta stuff the best though. During the game, you'll ally with a variety of other Protoss factions to augment your own Templar forces, the Nerazim, the Tal'Darim, and the Purifiers. Each of your units has 3 variants that can be selected in the War Council. Let's take the ranged warrior unit stock for example. The Nerazim have the Stalker, which can blink around the battlefield and is more agile than the competition. The Templar have the Dragoon, which, while having more HP and a slightly longer range than the others, is very slow and its size makes it hard to get efficient use out of lots at the same time. The Purifiers give you the Adept, which can bypass enemies by phasing out and deals bonus damage to light units, unlike the other two who get a bonus against armour. You can't change your selection mid-mission, so you have to balance your choices with one another to create a working strategy before you've even loaded in. If you pick the Resurrecting Sentinels, do you take Sentries to make them extra hard to kill, or Energizers to give them a much needed damage boost? These choices combined with the various abilities you can unlock for your ship, the Spear of Adun, give Legacy of the Void immense variety right from the outset. Just like how macro and micro choices are intertwined, you've got to keep your meta ones in mind even during missions. Most levels will have optional bonus objectives that allow you to purchase upgrades for your troops later in the game, and will require you to go off the beaten path in order to get them, adding yet another wrinkle to how you play. Or do they? I've been pretty nice to Starcraft so far, but there are just as many lessons to learn from its failures. First of all is those very same bonus objectives. In playing through all 3 campaigns on hard difficulty, I completed all of the optional objectives in every mission without much difficulty. Which of course begs the question, am I too good or are they too easy? Judging by my terrible performance in completing the actual mission objectives, I'm going to go with the latter. Optional objectives are only interesting when they require decisions to be made. When they're so easy to get so as not to matter at all, or was something I was going to do anyway, why bother including them? In the late game missions or during the 2 Zeratul mini campaigns, optional objectives were much more interesting precisely because meta decisions were no longer a factor. Securing some reinforcements or bonus resources actually took some effort and felt like a real reward, rather than something I get punished for not doing. Next up are hybrid enemies. They're a pretty crucial fixture of the plot, more on that later, but in terms of gameplay they become increasingly more common as the campaigns progress. The issue with this is that hybrids don't have the cohesive, easily recognisable design of the other units in the game. They just do a load of damage and have even more health, meaning that the only real way to deal with them is to maximise your damage output and not much else. Hybrids actively erode all 3 decision making facets we've covered by presenting such a huge threat that your strategy must counter them in some way, usually with overwhelming numbers or massed siege units. The tight tactical balance and interplay between various kinds of units, each with their own roles, is gone when hybrids are on the scene. A better inclusion of these unbuildable mega units is in Red Alert 3's Soviet campaign. It finishes off by introducing the mighty Tesla tank, a unit that kills all infantry in a single hit and can completely disable ground vehicles. This puts you onto the back foot as the Soviets' strength is normally in their ground troops, and forces you into a disadvantageous naval or air-based strategy, which is an interesting shake-up. Hero units, most notably Kerrigan in the Zerg campaign, have a similar problem. Rather than augmenting and supporting a variety of interesting strategies, hero units are so strategy defining that in order to play effectively you'll have to base your entire unit composition around them. In my game, Kerrigan could use Frenzy on a group of units to give them an extra 100 health and double their attack speed. This on my Raptor Zerglings who had the attack speed mutation was pretty much unstoppable, as you can see here. An attempt to use Banelings or Mutalisk flanks to break fortified positions, which is what those units are actually for, would have been significantly less effective and way more expensive than my wall of Mega Zerglings. Right, my last bit of criticism really shouldn't be in here, but damn it, I'm talking about it anyway. Starcraft II's story is so offensively terrible that it made me actively want to play the game less. Because this channel is supposed to be about game design and not me bitching about terrible writing in video games, here's 3 bullet points. 1. Blizzard. Morally ambivalent Chosen One stories have been lame since the early 90s and no one likes seeing awesome flawed villains like Kerrigan and Illidan warped into platitude spouting demigods who get instantly forgiven of their past crimes. 2. If you're going to shove characters down my throat, at least do me the courtesy of making them interesting. The Terran campaign has a couple of funny, scrappy oddballs like Tosh and Matt Horner.
Oh, and say hello to Matthew for me. Ask him why he never calls.
Whereas the Zerg and Protoss campaigns, on the other hand, have 2 interesting characters between them. Abathur, who is just delightfully weird, and Alarak, who manages to steal every scene he's in, not because his snark is particularly fresh, but because everyone around him speaks in dense expository prose that would fit better in community college Shakespeare than light sci-fi. 3. I feel like this can be pinned on the fact that the game's 3 campaigns were released several years apart, but come on, at least try to make your plot coherent. I feel like this bit sums up how little attention the writers were paying to their own story. During the Zerg campaign, Zeratul, Mr. Exposition Delivery Service, ominously says,
"You are on the path, and no longer need my guidance. You will not see me again, Kerrigan."
And this is a cool-ish moment. These two characters have a lot of history from the first game. Fast forward to the Protoss campaign's prologue, and look who Zeratul just happens to run into, his old buddy Kerrigan. The fact that Mr. Prophecy has obviously just contradicted his own ominous prediction isn't even given a little joke nod, it's just unashamedly retconned. There are far more egregious examples, like the Overmind, previous leader of the Zerg, retroactively being made into a sympathetic villain to justify the existence of the real big bad Amon, but Zeratul's rubbish prophecies were what really tipped me over the edge. I would do a fourth bullet point, but I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that Amon the Dark God, woo, is possibly the lamest thing Chris Metzen has ever put to paper. Oh, wait, no, he did time-travelling orcs, didn't he? Okay, the second lamest thing he's ever put to paper. Whew. Okay. Starcraft II's campaign is arguably the greatest one of its kind. Blizzard have gotten the art of enabling flexibility in all facets of their RTS down to an exact science, seamlessly blending all different kinds of decision making with an engaging, challenging gameplay. I've played through 2 of these campaigns 3 times now, and I was still finding new ways to set up my unit roster and different strategies to take on some of the harder missions. But for the reasons I outlined just now and several more minor balance concerns, the formula is far from perfect. That's why it's such a shame that Blizzard have all but abandoned single player games, and the new RTS that come out seem to be multiplayer focused or never really attempt to tackle the sheer tactical scope of StarCraft. Maybe like immersive sims, point and clicks and CRPGs before it, the classic style of RTS is going to have some sort of resurgence in the future, and I hope it will. But when the time comes to plan the next great real-time strategy campaign, I ask developers to look no further than Starcraft II, the queen of the single player RTS.
Commander, you've rained on my glorious parade. For this, I'm sending everything I've got at you. But I won't let you have the satisfaction of catching me. I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!